I'm recording now, so.
Okay. Sure.
So, I met you before, and you
Yeah.
spoke about real estate. I found it really interesting. In architecture, we talk about the built environment and as everything that's been shaped by human hands in the landscape, from the restored river to condos to single-family homes to the sidewalk itself.
Right.
And I was wondering how you could tell me how your idea of real estate is similar or dissimilar, especially in terms of caring about the built landscape as this shared or individual, private or public place.
I think there are a variety of things that make real estate compelling to me, and I think one of them is the universality of real estate. Architects have a tendency to think about the built environment based upon training. You know, how do you create specifications to allow the construction of something? How do you design something for how it will look in the environment? That really is built environment, not real estate in the way that I think about it. The way that I think about real estate has to involve the user, and the user doesn't have to be the person sitting in the space and the consumer of the space. It's also the folks that interact with that piece of built environment over time. So if I build a building somewhere, if I develop a building like my building in Shorewood, if you go into Altera and buy a coffee, you are a user of that space. If you're a neighbor on a walk with your dog or your kid and you're walking around the block, you're also interacting with that building. And everywhere I go, because of the nature of my field, my wife would suggest that conversations move toward real estate because I control the conversation and I want it to go that direction. But I think interestingly, as opposed to a lot of other professions, architecture included, people have this natural belief that they understand real estate. They interact with it every single day. They leave a piece of real estate wherever they live. They use real estate to get to wherever they're going, and then they use real estate again. And it's so fundamental in their lives that they feel comfortable having a conversation about it. They have opinions about whether a new development is appropriate or inappropriate. They have notions as to whether municipalities should do certain things like provide TIFs to Northwestern Mutual Life in order to facilitate financing and facilitate development. But for me, when I look at real estate, I try to have at least a couple of primary considerations, not just financial return, which is a traditional developer approach to, how do we make real estate work, but also whether there's a community return. And that community return, in many respects, has to do with all of the non-resident users of the real estate. So not the office tenant themselves, not the apartment dweller, not the store owner, but the people who aren't using the space but interact with the building and interact with the built environment.
And how do you respect the stakes they have in that? How do you?
Well, I think it's context. It's kind of anticipating what the objections are in the market prior to going through the process, and then some of those objections you simply can't overcome. I mean, I've said the following words many times in approval processes. I will always tell you the truth. You won't always like what I tell you. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. And so, what is that?
Thank goodness.
Yeah. I mean, so, for example, my buildings in Shorewood, they're 4 stories, there's 3 stories of residential over a story of retail. The greatest compliment I receive is when people tell me that they feel like those buildings feel like they should have been there for a long time and that they're appropriate to the neighborhood. Yeah, but the person right next door who had nothing behind them for some period of time or a vacant lot, they now have a 4-story building behind them. And I'm not going to be able to please those people. If they are carrying some kind of fundamental objection to density in their backyard, I probably can't get from here to there in terms of satisfying their concerns. That said, if I do a good job with the building, they may not be pleased, but the next person who buys their house will have a different perspective because that was there already. The building was there already. So a lot of it is taking a longer view, and developers, like any profession, we think of ourselves as technical experts, and we think of ourselves as having insight into our profession that exceeds the insight that a non-professional would have into our profession. So some of it is the hubris of a surgeon. I mean, we believe that the surgery that we are performing on the built environment is appropriate for it, and in the long run will improve it.
How do you see so we've kind of discussed how you see development as care for the built environment, or caring development. How do you find a balance between development and preservation, or where do you find that?
Well, I think, historic preservation is interesting. There's a lot of perspectives on what's appropriate preservation, what is preservation for preservation's sake. I am not at heart a preservationist for preservation's sake. I'm comfortable with the notion that just because something is old, it's not necessarily important. And what I believe is that when given context of the community, and when given the context of kind of a broader built environment, and what is it that we draw identity from as a broader community, there are buildings that absolutely must be saved. It's just not appropriate to take them down because they have too much value in community identity. I also believe that there are buildings, even in historic districts, that they're not contributing elements to that district. They aren't fundamentally important in any way. And so I try to take a very balanced approach that reflects not only the question at hand, which may be, can we do an addition on this house in the North Point South Historic District, but also why would we make that change? Why would we? What community values are we able to further by making that change? So a controversial one in the North Point South community was the home located on the corner of Back Bay and Terrace. It's a couple doors south of Villa Terrace. It's now a Cream City brick home. It was previously painted. And an addition is currently under construction on that home. And the North Point neighborhood, the historic Water Tower Trust, was very, very vocally opposed to it. And I, as a member of not only that neighborhood, those are my neighbors, they live a block away from me, not only as a member of that neighborhood, but also as a member of the Historic Preservation Commission, spoke very strongly in favor of that addition. And I think that one of the things that pushed me to that position in my own mind was why the addition was being made. And one of the things that we know is that things that were built long ago were built for users long ago. The way they interacted with the space as a user is different now than what it was. These old homes, for example, in our neighborhood, were built in an era where folks had servants. They had servant quarters. They had kitchens that were deeply utilitarian in nature. They had separate stairs and access for the servants from the family. They didn't have informal living environments. They had a formal living room, a formal dining room, a utilitarian kitchen. They might have had an office with rich paneled walls and all of those things. They had bedrooms with limited closets. They had bathrooms with limited plumbing amenities. And what I believe is the greatest path toward preservation of our neighborhood, the heavy lifting was done by the group long ago when the neighborhood was legitimately in jeopardy. Homes were being sold for very, very modest amounts. The hospital was expanding. Apartment buildings were getting built. Homes were being torn down. All of those things were happening, and the organization was formed, stepped in, and did all of the right things in getting the district recognized as a national district, making sure that standards were upheld, created and then upheld for how to treat those homes and all of those properties. Today, though, preservation in many respects is at its strongest when consumers come in and assign value to the history. They assign value to the quality of craftsmanship and workmanship in the homes, and are willing to invest in the homes in order to improve the livability for the families. If we want this neighborhood or other historic neighborhoods to thrive, they need families. They need the next generation of homeowners to come in and make the neighborhood their home. And that home in particular is a terrific home, but it had an unacceptable kitchen. It didn't have an informal living environment. It was extremely hard to contemplate how you would use that home effectively to raise your children and live the way people live today. And the addition that they were making, and that they're making right now, solved for those issues using the highest quality materials, using an incredibly well contemplated and effective design. It went through the process with historic preservation such that Paul Jakubowicz and staff had the ability to influence decisions that were being made by the architect. And for me, saying no because it's a historic district is a short-sighted decision based upon preservationist policy rather than preservationist philosophy. And I just don't like to, I do not feel comfortable equivocating policy and philosophy unless the policy accurately and appropriately reflects the philosophy of the objectives that the community has today.
One last question before we shift to Jammer Avenue questions. We've been drawing a few homes in North Point South, and a lot of them have been at one point in time divided into multiple units.
Yeah.
And either come back together or they're still multiple units.
Right.
And so from the sidewalk, you really can't tell whether it's a multifamily unit.
Right.
How do you have an opinion on whether multifamily units are appropriate for?
Well, I'm comfortable. I'm very comfortable with multifamily units. I mean, my house is single family. Across the street from me, on the northeast corner of Ivanhoe and Lake, is a large home. It's a 3-family. Wendy and Peter Slocum on the northwest corner of Wyoming and Terrace. That home was basically a rooming house prior to their truly remarkable rehab of that house. I think that one of the challenges that we have is that the size of the homes necessarily results in a purchase price that can be very complicated. And I think that for me, I don't have any problem with rental as a home, as a living environment versus ownership. I think that people should live in nice places and have a quality community in which they can live. And I think that rentals are absolutely fine, or sale of units as condominiums. What I think matters most is that there's a stewardship, and folks recognize that they do have. They knew going in that they were in a historic district. They bought with an understanding that it's a historic district. They should understand their limitations and why they can't do certain things and why they need to do certain things other ways. But I personally have no concerns whatsoever about those homes being broken into pieces.
Just to clarify, what do you mean by stewardship?
Well, I think that if you own a historic home or a home in a historic district, you've taken on the responsibility of ensuring that during your ownership, you aren't harming the integrity of the community. And I mean, I think that's just a baseline community obligation. No matter where you live, there's a sense of stewardship that goes along with it. But whereas in a cul-de-sac community or a suburb that has no standards, you can paint your house fuchsia if you want to paint your house. If you've got terrible taste and that's what you want to do, you can paint your house fuchsia. In a historic district, there are reasons why you can't paint your house fuchsia. And I think that accepting that and understanding that is one thing. Adopting it as a philosophy of why we do certain things to our homes, it's that crossover where you adopt stewardship as an ethos.
Chelsea, before we move on to Donna, I think I have some follow-up. You were talking about your membership on the Historic Preservation Commission.
Right.
What is the status of that commission as far as approving or not approving changes to homes? I mean, what
So
kind of governmental function do you have?
So the Historic Preservation Commission is really a body that is tasked with making an assessment of folks applying to do things to buildings that either have historic status or are located in historic neighborhoods. That's what our chart, we can look at those things, okay?
And your charter is for this particular neighborhood?
It's
here?
for the entire city of Milwaukee.
Oh,
So the Historic Preservation Commission has jurisdiction over any issue revolving around changes to properties that are historic or that are located in historic districts. We also are, if someone, like for example, this building's not in a historic district, okay? If someone wanted to tear this building down, you or any other citizen in Milwaukee could nominate it for historic status. Before the building could be torn down, that nomination would need to be considered. Our body would be the body that would consider this building for designation as a historic structure. So we look at buildings that are historic, buildings that may be historic, and they have to be deemed historic before we have jurisdiction.
okay. I thought this was a special committee just for the.
No, this is for these. I was appointed by the mayor. These are appointees that are on the body, and the commission has jurisdiction over all of the city of Milwaukee.
Okay. And I have another question before we move on to Delmer, because I happen to live in Shorewood.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I've seen you at the Altair.
That's probably
there.
true, yeah.
Were you involved with the development on Capitol?
The Mandel Group development?
Oh, yeah.
I am not. I am not.
And that, does the Historic Preservation Committee have anything to do with that, or that's just city?
So it's the city of Milwaukee that does that. So Mandel Group's 6-story building with the Walgreens in it next to Sendik's.
Yes.
That building was entitled through the Village of Shorewood, so the Community Development Authority, the CDA, and the Village of Shorewood were the two bodies that were directly involved in working through those issues. Now, Shorewood also has its Planning Commission and its an architectural review board. It has its bodies that look at all of those things. That also happens to be even if that was in Milwaukee, it was a parking lot. The Historic Preservation Commission would never have seen that, even if it had occurred in Milwaukee.
Right. Do you think that that's an appropriate structure?
I'm not at liberty to answer that question on the record.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We are focusing on Downer Avenue as a historic district,
Right.
historic shopping district. So I want to ask you, how do you think Downer Avenue and change, how Downer Avenue should be changing this?
So I think one of the things that happens when we look at places like Downer is people have a tendency to equivocate market conditions with vacancies on the street. Okay, those two things don't always go together. So for example, one of the things that we always need to consider is ownership. Who owns a building? What are their objectives in owning that building? What are they trying to accomplish through their ownership? So the current ownership of the buildings on the north end of the street, on the west side there's one group of owners, on the east side there's one owner. Okay. On the south end of Downer, across from the parking structure, so from the new Pizza Man all the way south to Starbucks, that's one owner. And it's the same owner as the east side of the street on the north end. And when you look at what the plans are that have been approved, when those buildings were purchased, they were purchased from a guy named Dan Katz. Newland Enterprises, Boris Gochman, entered into a partnership with Joel Lee. They bought those buildings. Now Joel owns those buildings. Well, they went through the approval process. The parking structure, which was so deeply divisive in the neighborhood and caused all kinds of challenges for folks, that was part of an approval process that was contemplating substantial changes to the Downer district. There's a boutique hotel plan for above the vacant storefronts on the south end of the street. There's a 92-unit apartment tower planned for, Stoll, behind the Starbucks in that vacant lot. There is a 30 to 40 unit 6-story building that will be built, potentially soon on the north end of the street at where the Associated Bank and the Associated Bank parking lot are across from Sendik's. Those changes and the planning for those changes requires this very long look at time and what do you do in the interim while you're still doing those things. If the hotel is going to happen, and let's assume it is going to happen, they can't really afford to lease those substantial vacancies on the ground floor north of Starbucks or Boswell Books, the old Chancery and Einstein Bagels and Time to Kill. They can't lease those because as soon as they give somebody a leasehold interest there, they can't disrupt that. So there are challenges in thinking about why things are what they are versus what could things be when they are that. Now, looking forward, I think that what the Downer District needs to have is, one, rental rates that support the businesses that you want to have there. Two,
What does that mean?
retailers can afford rent based upon the volumes that they believe they can generate. And you can look through, there aren't really any substantial resources on this, but every retailer has kind of a benchmark. What percentage of their gross volume can be their occupancy costs in a space? So restaurants really want to target 6 or 7% of gross volume as their total occupancy costs. So if you're going to do $1 million a year of volume, you really only want to be spending about $70,000 a year of occupancy costs. If you have 1,200 square feet, or let's say you have 2,000 square feet, you've got $60,000 of rent that you can totally pay. That means that you can pay in total $30 a square foot between rent and taxes and common area maintenance and insurance and all of those things that comprise occupancy costs. If you go higher than that, or if your volume goes lower than that, your business is in jeopardy. So every different kind of retailer, whether it be a soft goods retailer like Olive Organic, or whether it be a consumer product like glasses at Optics, every one of those folks has some benchmark that they need to hit in order to have a vibrant business where the rent structure isn't contributing to poor financial performance. Business sustaining rents are rents that facilitate the businesses of the tenants you'd like to have there. So if you want Subway, your rents can be higher. If you want a dynamic local delicatessen sandwich place, your rents are going to be something different than if they're Subway. So one of the things that I think should happen in all shopping districts, whether it be a strip mall in the suburbs or a main street in a small town or Downer Avenue here in Milwaukee, is tenanting strategy. What do you want on the street? What is it supposed to feel like? Is it national tenants and we want Anthropologie and we want high-end national clothing stores, or do we want H&R Block and national credit financial services providers, or do we want local retail? Now, they've done a good job with local retail, particularly on the north end of that street. Now, there's been some cyclical vacancy, which is something that just happens over time. This has been the worst economic conditions of our time, so there's complications associated with that. Hollander does extremely well. I love Paperworks. I don't know how long she'll keep doing that business. I think it's a hard business, and she's been doing it a long time, and she's terrific at it. I think Mick, who owns Olive Organic Clothing, is a very good friend of mine. His store is spectacular. Tough business, it's complicated. The fact that he opened this home design piece, I think, is pretty compelling, and he sells organic mattresses and all kinds of green housing products, so countertops and no VOC paints and those kinds of things, and I think that'll help. Downer Liquor is a great community resource. I like those guys a lot. Breadsmith, I don't eat much bread, so it's not my thing, but it's good to have that kind of use there. But I think we're going to see things change both for the good and for the bad over the course of the next little while here. You know, there's a problem. CVS as a building is a problem. You know, there's no storefront windows. It's got pretty crass national, drugstore chain type elements associated with it. There should be storefront windows on both sides of that building that should be engaged and active and dynamic, and it's not. Sendix has been on a path towards closing here for some time. It's going to happen. It's for sale in the market right now. Somebody has it under contract. There will be a change there. It's not clear yet what that change will be. Based on what I know about the site, and I know a fair amount, I'm very optimistic that we can preserve the use. If I were to have bought that building and I made an effort to buy that building, I would have changed it substantially. Changed it substantially. I would have re-tenanted. I would have started from scratch on the ground floor. I would have completely redone the ground floor. I would have put in all new storefront window systems down, historic window systems, but all new storefront systems all the way down Downer and then all the way down Park. I would have made it 4 smaller stores, a bar restaurant and a European market and a flower store, and I would have taken elements of Sendix, broke them into discrete pieces instead of having one large market, which doesn't appear to work in our market, particularly given the strength of what Whole Foods has done. Now, Whole Foods is finally hitting the numbers that they targeted. I heard $50 million a year as a number that they've been flirting with. So, I think the Sendix is going to change. I think that Via is terrific. I think that the physical therapy place is actually a fine use. It's actually interesting looking from the street. I think the original Pancake House is a fine use, but the building was more interesting when it was the coffee trader than what it is right now. But I don't think that's going to change. I mean, I think there's a level of stability there. And I think the real question for me with Downer is how much do we really want it to change? As a community, why do we want it to change, and what really do we want to change? I mean, I think most people look at Downer and they have concerns about tenancy. They aren't looking at other than the parking structure. It's not the built environment that gives people pause on Downer. That's not what people are really talking about. What people are really talking about is why isn't it full? Why isn't it dynamic? Why isn't it vibrant? Why isn't it a place where everybody goes? Like, how could that not be a successful shopping district? Well, I think some of it's by design right now. And it's hard to explain that to the market.
Could you talk more about the hotels and the future changes that are planned for that, and whether you think they are appropriate?
Well, I think they're appropriate. I mean, I'm an urbanist. I'm not a new urbanist. I'm an urbanist, and I think that density is really important. And I think that the closer you are to the central business district, the more dense you should expect your community to be. Because there's a great book that you all should read. It's called The Great Inversion. It's by a guy named Alan Ehrenholt. It's a very, very good book looking at kind of patterns of development and why things are doing what they're doing. But in any case, it started off that people lived in the cities, and spectacular, beautiful homes and residences were as close to the city as they could possibly be. So Grand Avenue, West Wisconsin Avenue now, this neighborhood, these were the first neighborhoods built, right? I mean, Shorewood and Whitefish Bay are new compared to those communities. So we get to the Great Depression. All of a sudden, there aren't resources in the cities to maintain the cities the way that they used to. Infrastructure starts to crumble. Building owners can't afford to maintain their buildings. And so we start to have urban decay. Then you go World War II. Everybody leaves. People come back. But even prior to World War II, as part of the CCC and the things that FDR was doing, all of a sudden there was this commitment to infrastructure improvements on a much broader scale across the country. So the national park system and the beginnings of the freeway system and all of these things. Post World War II, something important happened. One, we go into an economic boom. Industry starts going like crazy, particularly in the cities. Milwaukee is booming, right? Our population is growing, everything's going right. Well, the cities became very rapidly an unfriendly place for the affluent. And what happened was there was more pollution, there were more people, there were more problems. Then we have all kinds of, Milwaukee's always been a city of immigrants, right? But so immigrants come, then we get the wave of African Americans up from the South, and all the way down through what happened between 1946 and really 1980 was urban flight, white flight, whatever you want to call it, but we had rapidly changing neighborhoods. Neighborhoods would turn extremely quickly. So affluence moved farther and farther away. Land values got higher farther away from the city as opposed to close in. That's an inversion. That was an inversion of land value and an inversion of attractiveness. We're inverting back again now. And we're seeing the Third Ward and the Near East Side here and a bunch of these urban communities all of a sudden have substantially more value again than they had previously. So I think that what we need to think about for Downer Avenue and in all of these near urban communities is if what we want is less density, we should appropriately live farther away. Because cities are supposed to be dense. We're supposed to find ourselves forced to go vertically because of the level of amenity that cities provide. It should be attractive to more people. In the Downer neighborhood in particular, I think we are underserved between, if you think about where hotels are in this city, between the Pfister and the North Shore, you've got kind of a crappy Hilton on the river and not a lot else in terms of places to stay. And I do think there's room in the market for a boutique hotel. I think the quality of the hotel is going to be extremely important. The quality of the amenities that are provided as a part of that hotel for the public to consume. So there needs to be a great bar restaurant. There needs to be those types of amenities so that if you live in the neighborhood, you can consume it like the Iron Horse Hotel. Has a bar and restaurant that people go to from the city. It's not just hotel patrons. In that neighborhood, I do think that a hotel is fine. I think that the 92-unit apartment building or whatever it is that they ultimately build there, the devil's in the details. There's tall buildings over there right now. These windows viewed that way, you'd see tall buildings poking out over there. So I am not as concerned about density or the use in any way as I am a little bit about the architecture. I just want to make sure that the buildings endure. You build a building today, better last at least 50 years.
The development that's just near the Downer Theater, there's something going on there right now, some construction on that same block as the Downer Theater, just north of it.
Oh, that's Pizza Man. Yeah, Matt Rinka Chung is the architect. Joel Lee is the owner, and they're doing I can find the renderings. They're doing a comprehensive rehab of that space to allow for Pizza Man to go in.
What do you think of that?
Oh, it's great.
As a tenant?
Oh, it's great. That's perfect use. Pizza Man was an icon in the community, and they did have good pizza.
Oh, that was the one that was burned down
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought maybe that was a national chain.
No. It's the locals. It's Pizza Man.
Oh, okay.
They're perfect.
Are you able to speak freely about the garage parking structure?
Sure.
I don't know a lot about it.
Uh-huh.
Make assumptions about why it wasn't welcomed, but can you tell us briefly about the garage and your opinion of it?
Well, I think the site should have been a hotel or another use. So first, I don't think that's not where I would have put the garage. Okay, so now let's assume that I don't get to have that wish. It's going to be a garage. When a large-scale project starts with a piece of infrastructure, and then the project doesn't happen, you're stuck with the infrastructure without the context that defined it as part of a broader plan. I think in the future we need to think about what that means. We missed the opportunity to think, okay, if the garage is the only building that happens in this large plan, is the garage okay? And I think the answer today would be no, that garage is not okay, absent the context of other things that might have gone along with it. I also think that garages are not attractive just as a baseline. So you have to pick what form of unattractive you want. And I think that the kind of modern vernacular of that garage unfortunately stands out in that neighborhood more than it would in others. Now, I am all for a stark juxtaposition of the modern with the old. I would personally much rather see super contemporary buildings built in historic districts than have look-alike, wannabe, matchy-matchy type pseudo-historical buildings built in those districts. If you want to allow history to shine, juxtapose against it. And I really strongly believe that. And I think that the parking structure notionally was trying to do that. It didn't want to try to just blend in and be something like on the street. I just don't know that you can get there with a parking structure. I mean, short of some really innovative, expensive things that you could do, I don't know how you make that particularly attractive as a modern design form.
Fill me in a little bit. Was it designed as was it supposed to be
It's a parking structure.
a parking structure right from the beginning, or
Yeah.
was it supposed to be part of something else?
Well, the hotel was going to get built. It was going to be support parking for the hotel.
Okay.
So, and the design of the hotel, I think, there was a preliminary design, I think, approved. I don't remember what it looked like exactly, but they were going to take a somewhat more contemporary approach to what that hotel would look like. So then that would have been juxtaposed against the parking structure, and there would have been kind of a blend across the street. The challenge for me was that the process was complicated by any number of factors, most of which were totally appropriate. Neighbors very upset about a parking garage going up right behind them. Neighbors upset about whether a parking garage was even an appropriate use. Now, while I might not have put the garage there, I absolutely believe that there needed to be parking for the community. Personally, I would have liked to have seen it on where the apartment building is going to go behind, but now they were going to put an apartment building there as part of it. So that spot wasn't available as well. So there was this whole trickle, you throw the rock in the pond and you try to figure out where the ripples go, but if somebody else throws a rock in the pond, you got to figure out where those intersections are and work with the turbulence that's there. And I think, it ended up where it is for a reason. I mean, if you were to ask anyone in that neighborhood, they would say, well, why didn't they build the University Club Tower parking garage, which was essentially precast panels with brick and, looks like an older building. Well, that's an enclosed garage. It doesn't have the openings, so it's fully ventilated, and it's a much more expensive structure, and it's part of a $100 million building. I mean, there's a lot of things that go along with why parking structures look the way they do. I don't know how you can put lipstick on that at this point. I look at it.
Build up on it? Turn it into
Yeah, well, I mean, you could probably build up, but the neighbors are never going to allow for it to get higher. They're not going to want more building there.
But there's a hotel plan for
Across the street, but that's farther away from the historic neighborhood. I mean, it's yet farther away from those homes that are right there on Summit.
East and
Yeah.
The Water Tower neighborhood just is only part of the east side of Tower Avenue is part of Water Tower neighborhood, the west side is not.
So it's technically outside. It's outside the district.
Unless somebody else, I'm curious about the theater. I love
Yeah.
old movie houses.
Yeah.
How is that doing as a business? Is that like
I don't know. It's Landmark, the same folks that operate this theater.
Right.
Great building, crummy theater in a lot of ways. I mean, it's from a moviegoer's perspective. I mean, the seats are uncomfortable. It's just not a great movie experience. It's an awesome theater. I hope they're doing well. Art House, I mean, there's got to be an art house theater in Milwaukee. I don't know where else it's going to be. So, I mean, I think that they've got all kinds of history on their side in terms of it being a viable spot for it. I don't know the economics of that business. I don't have contacts. Yeah. No, I'm interested. I just don't. You sell tickets. I don't even know what it, like. I don't know what it costs them to get, Chocolat for a run when it's released. I don't even know what that costs. Does it cost them $2,500 to have the film and to be able to show it, and then how many tickets do they need to sell in order? I literally don't know how that works.
Do you know who the owner is?
Well, Landmark. It's a Landmark is a chain.
Oh, it's a chain.
Yeah.
Do you have any projects on Downer Avenue?
I don't.
Just curious.
No. I try to stay abreast of what's happening on Downer Avenue because I'm in the neighborhood, but I don't have any projects, and I know pretty well who's doing what where. But Downer's short. It's 2 blocks long.
It's very short.
And what people don't realize is that Silver Spring and Whitefish Bay is actually pretty short too. It's only 3 blocks long. It ends at St. Monica, practically speaking. Oakland's a much longer district in Shorewood than either of those two. Sorry, I stole your chair.
And may we know your home address?
2237 North Lake Drive.
We're going to be there this afternoon. Not there, but right next door. We're doing a house or something right around there. 2200 block of Lake Drive.
There's two 2200 blocks. Which house are you doing?
I'm going to be photo documenting the Blatz Mansion, and yesterday we were at 2225 North Lake Drive, one of Randy's properties.
Oh.
I forget the tenant's name. Greg.
2225 is between Kenilworth. It's between Kenilworth and Wyoming. It's the southwest corner of. Yeah, and I don't really keep track of all, but it's the southwest corner of Kenilworth, or of Ivanhoe and Lake. Yeah, that's 2 doors south of me. I'm 1 in from the corner, going north from there. I'm a brick house painted gray. Really needs to be painted again.
So we focused in this interview on you as a developer, not as a resident in Watertown. We would be interested in that, but I think your knowledge as a developer has been most helpful to us.
Sure.
So, thank you. These are the general questions that I asked you.
Okay.
I'll keep a copy of them.
So what do you guys? How does the process work for you folks? This is a project you're getting credit for, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Getting some credit. She and I are both in the PhD program.
Right.
Fran is a
Community
gracious
volunteer.
Yeah.
doing this in your own time.
Mm-hmm.
There's some interest, which is great.
So this is going to lead to what?
The first week we're drawing homes and we're learning about architecture history and history of the neighborhood by drawing these homes and how they were changed. As I said, the division of one unit in a single family home into.
Well, like my house was a bed and breakfast.
Wow.
People did a lot of things to figure out how to own these homes.
So that's one of the things we've been learning over and over in some of these properties. And another thing we've learned a lot about is the servant spaces, this hidden infrastructure of the home. And so in the first week we draw homes, in the second week we're interviewing people and about the various stakes they have in the neighborhood. And in the third week we're beginning to turn those into short documentaries, 3-minute documentaries that will go on YouTube. And we'd like to have some kind of exhibit. It will probably be temporary yard signs at the locations which we've drawn, which are not all homes. Some of them are like the Bradford Beach House. And
That's a cool structure.
QR codes.
Yes.
So hopefully people will walk around with their smartphones and watch our videos. We also need to have a traditional exhibit where we have boards.
Right.
So this is so-and-so's home. This is how they take care of it. We'll be doing short bio pieces historic figures in the Water Tower neighborhood as kind of chosen by the neighborhood association, preservation association, because they came to us for this project.
Lloyd and Dawn.
So Barbara Elsner, they didn't ask for Randy, but Randy's been very helpful.
They wouldn't have asked for Randy, probably.
And so as we do this process, different stories emerge. A story about development on Downer, or what Downer, the values at stake in development, or development as stewardship. We'll see how that story evolves. But those are the kind of stories we'd like to tell. And we'd like to create a website where people upload their own stories too, whether it's just a voice recording or they make a movie.
Sure.
Or write a paragraph or take pictures.
I like it.
And Regent, my professor, has a 5-year plan. He wants to follow North Avenue out, beginning here because we were able to find a bit of funding, and then Washington Park, and on to Sherman Park with the same kind of overall question: how do you care for your neighborhood? There's a strong contrast where some people can't care for their own bodies, so they're not able to care for their community. And so by asking that question along this line,
Right. I like it. So somebody should do transit's become such a big conversation. I think it would be fascinating to do something almost like this, but you could change it in some important ways. Look at the old trolley line, the old commuter trolley line, or look at the old commuter rail line that ran out to the Lake Country. You know, there was a commuter rail line that ran at the Lake Country. You could be in Beaver Lake for the summer or whatever at your family cottage and hop on the train at the depot and come to downtown and do that. And then there was the trolley line that ran down Oakland Avenue right in front of our buildings in Shorewood, and it ran from Whitefish Bay down to actually went through the intersection right over there, and then went up Brady Street, and then down I think Water Street, and it's interesting to think about what would be there now along that stretch, given the way we consume transportation today, if it was still there. How different would it be? But there's a reason that the main streets, there's a reason that not Silver Spring quite as much, but Oakland Avenue, Brady Street, you know, you look at where these old districts were and they were on the transportation line, so you could stop at Shortino's Bakery and go back up to Whitefish Bay, and you didn't have to have a car. You know?
And one of my classmates also did a study of the trolley line along Brady Street. She was listening to how the old trolleys used to sound. It was so loud. She determined
squeaky and rattly.
Steam.
Yeah.
And
Well, they converted them to electric.
Side streets.
Well, they did convert at the end. They converted them to overhead electric.
Okay.
So
I remember that.
they took the tracks out in, I don't know, 1960, something like that. But yeah, it's interesting to think. I've actually, it just so happens that I've now been involved in 4 developments on the trolley line.
Yeah, it's sad to think that we had such a resource.
Well, it's a totally different conversation. Transit's a very long conversation.
If I meet any architecture students who would like to
There you
do
go.
historic research on the trolleys.
It'd be cool.
Yeah.
I think it would be cool. There's a lot of photographic data out there that I think is interesting.
Well, thank you very
Of
much
course.
for your time.
Of course. Nice to see you again. When are you done?
Probably 5 years, but
5 years? Are you going to stick around here for all of it?
I'm not sure. We'll see. Depends on how things go with my personal life. So, I'll be here for a couple more years.